Today, we will continue our review of the various strategies that you can use to construct your narrative essay. Remember, when constructing a narrative, your goal is to put the reader into your position and show them what you experienced, felt, and thought. We really want to work on showing the reader what happened versus telling them the events as they occurred. Last week, we focused on introduction strategies. These strategies can be helpful for starting your narrative, as we want to hook the reader and get them interested in the essay. But they can also be applied to other modes of writing. This week, we will also discuss conclusion strategies, detail, and dialogue. As we discussed in the last module, conclusion strategies can mirror our introduction strategies. This means that we can revisit the introduction strategy that we used at the start of our essay when we construct our conclusion, which can help wrap things up for our reader. Remember, when we revisit our introduction strategy in our conclusion, that creates a frame for our reader. Thus, our conclusion strategies include quotations, concessions, paradoxes, anecdotes or narratives, facts or statements, questions, incorporating background information, or revisiting the overall goal. Try to utilize the same introduction strategy and revisit it in your conclusion to create that frame for your reader. Traditionally, detail is defined as an individual feature, fact, or item. That is a very vague definition. So what is detail? Why do we use detail in writing? Take a few minutes and consider the role that detail plays in narrative writing. Why do you think we need to include strong detail when telling a story? What does it mean for our reader? In a narrative, our goal is to help our reader to experience what we experienced. This means that we want to incorporate good detail. Good detail will help to paint a picture in our reader's mind, which can help them to put themselves in our shoes and get into our story. Let's take a look at an example of incorporating detail. As we see here, Grandmother Workman reached over and grabbed her grandson's arm. He was nervous because the staircase was so steep, but she leaned against him and they began to climb. From this passage, what details are included? What do we know about Grandmother Workman? What do we know about her grandson? Can you picture the scene that's in front of you? One of the easiest ways to incorporate good detail in narrative writing is to consider your senses. Your senses can help you establish sensory detail. What is sensory detail? Well, sensory detail is that which is derived from your senses, or those things that you experienced all around you, like sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. Do you remember our earlier example? What do you remember about Grandmother Workman and her grandson? Let's take a look at another version of that paragraph that includes sensory detail. Grandmother Workman lurched over and grabbed the pale skin of Randall's thin forearm with her leathery hand. The folds and creases beneath her skin coiled themselves out like electrical wiring, like the bloated, roughly textured relief map of the world that his mother just posted above his bedside table. Randall looked ahead toward the winding spiral staircase, fidgeted with a small hole in his baseball jersey, and bit his lip. His mouth filled with the sweet, coppery taste of blood as she leaned in closely toward him, breathing her hot breath on the damp hair at the base of his neck. She smelled of wet cigarettes and bacon. As they slowly climbed the long, steep staircase, the only sound was his grandmother's labored breathing and the mournful creak of the wooden stairs. What more do we learn about Grandmother Workman and Randall from this passage? How can we characterize each character? Are you better able to picture this scene in your mind? We can also use dialogue to draw our reader into our narrative. Dialogue can help our readers to picture a scene and understand how the characters are interacting with one another. Dialogue is defined as a conversation between two or more people. That said, including trivial or unimportant conversations within a narrative can cause problems for your reader. When we include trivial dialogue, our readers can struggle to determine what is important. This makes interesting and purposeful dialogue quite difficult to write. There are a few things to keep in mind when writing dialogue. First, dialogue should always do more than just communicate a piece of information. You can incorporate speech and action to show your readers what is happening and how the characters are interacting. Dialogue should also be readable, but you want to try to capture the character's voice. This means that your dialogue does not have to be grammatically correct. Next, Dialogue is formatted by including double quotation marks around the character's speech and by indenting whenever a new character speaks. Finally, you can use slang or dialect to characterize your speakers, but be careful. Now, let's look at an example. In this example, we see a conversation between two speakers, Katie and Tony. Take note of the use of double quotation marks and indenting. Now, consider what we learned from this conversation. What is happening? Although including dialogue and conversations are important, we want to include the impactful pieces of the conversation, and we want to use this dialogue to further our plot and narrative development. In this revised example, we see a bit more sensory detail incorporated alongside our dialogue. This presents a more complete picture to our reader, allowing them to better understand what is happening between Tony and Katie. Finally, there are a few things to keep in mind when formatting dialogue. We know that we want to begin a new paragraph and indent appropriately whenever a new line of dialogue occurs, and we want to make sure to put our dialogue in our double quotation marks. Our punctuation will also go inside the quotation marks, and we want to use tags like he said or she said to establish who is speaking. Try to use a variety of tags to capture the mood of the conversation. This could be things like said, or she questioned, he called, she cried. Using a variety of tags can help you to communicate the emotion in the exchange. Do also use these tags sparingly. You do not have to write Katie said each time Katie speaks, as long as the reader can follow who is speaking during a conversation.